On today's episode,
I personally think that if everyone went to therapy, the world would be a much better place. We wouldn't just be happier, but we'd all be safer. We'd see a massive reduction in depression, anxiety, and suicide rates among Asian Americans. We'd see a generation of Asians who don't have to downplay or just endure their identity, but actually celebrate it.
meet Alice Zhang and Nisha Desai, founders of Anise Health, a venture-backed, female-led company reimagining mental health for the Asian community. Today, Anise is setting the new standard for personalized care, building the first mental health platform specifically for the Asian community. They also get real about what building takes, the pressure, the stakes, and the courage to lead with both mission and heart. Let's take a listen. All right, Alice and Nisha, I would love to do a little crystal ball exercise. If both of you would be willing to share. So I want to jump into the future 100 years from now. And Anise Health and culturally attuned care is now the gold standard across the entire mental health care industry. Can you? Yes, yes, yes. What does that world look like? And
A dream come true.
a dream come true.
I have been working in the healthcare industry for a while, and I would say right now it's far from perfect.
Mm.
I think, as we relate to mental health, don't have appropriate reimbursement.
Yeah.
There's not appropriate data being used from minority populations to create the standard of care. We also don't necessarily take a very precision medicine approach to mental health care. It's very one size fits all today. So as I look forward, I think about the role that Anise can play in really standardizing a more personalized approach to mental health care. And that's what we call the gold standard.
Yes.
It's really changing the healthcare system as we currently know it and making it into something 10 times, 100 times better than what it is today.
Yeah.
And so, what does that actually mean? I think for me, it's really have Anise and the model that we are building be taught in all grad schools so that clinicians of all different backgrounds feel comfortable in knowing how to treat diverse populations effectively.
Yes.
It also means making sure that data from Asian Americans as well as other underserved minority groups is being used in the development of the standard of care.
Mm-hmm.
It also means making sure that all health systems are employing this gold standard, and the Anise model is really integrated with primary care. So mental health doesn't really exist in a silo as just something that you do on the side, but it's really part of preventative care and something that everyone grows up doing and taking care of. And then lastly, and probably the most important for many people, is that it's covered by insurance. Because for a lot of people, mental health care is already pretty stressful to consider starting. And if there's another added barrier of high costs, then it just becomes something like another kind of excuse to not do it. And so if we can get, kind of full parity with medical benefits for holistic set of services that work for people like us, that to me would be a gold standard. And I think all of those things combined would just be, like I said, a dream come true and what we're really aiming for with Anise Health.
Yes, Anisha, I love that. You said personalized, preventative, and full parity with medical. It's so critically important, and what a beautiful vision indeed. Alice, would you be willing to share your thoughts?
Yeah. So Nisha and I share the same passion for improving our current healthcare system, which has a lot of problems that Nisha mentioned. I think in addition to that, at the community level, I personally think that if everyone went to therapy, the world would be a much better place. We wouldn't just be happier, but we'd all be safer. We'd see a massive reduction in depression, anxiety, and suicide rates among Asian Americans, which is currently the leading cause of death for Asian American young adults. And for us Asian communities, we see a generation of Asians who don't have to downplay or just endure their identity, but actually celebrate it and be able to break our cycle of intergenerational trauma
Mm.
so that the next generation is inheriting our resilience and, a lot of positive things that we have to share about our culture, but leaving the wound of the past behind.
Yes, leaving the wound of the past behind. Indeed, when you were both sharing, I took an inhale and then like literally exhaled, because how amazing and incredible would it be to make mental health care accessible to everyone? And the impact that it would, the beautiful impact, Alice, as you spoke, that it would have on specifically our community, not just our community, but just, I feel like globally, like in our community, what a beautiful impact that would have. Alice, I'm wondering if you would be willing to share. You've both shown that purpose can definitely scale. And for the person listening who wants to live and lead with more meaning, rather, but doesn't know where to start, what change will happen in their lives if they take to heart everything you both are sharing today?
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge that it's hard, right? And that's one of the purpose of our life is to find that meaning and
Mm,
purpose. And I think a lot of Asians are raised to be really good at identifying the what in life,
yeah.
like what they need to do to get ahead, get the grades, get the job, etc. But we rarely had the chance to ask the why because we weren't really asked, the why growing up.
Yes.
And so we can often mistake checking off boxes for progress because it does feel like you're propelling forward and you're climbing up the ladder and
Yes.
you become very efficient at it. But later on, you might climb up the ladder only to realize at the top that it was leaning against the wrong wall. So that's tough. And I would say the advice is to just start listening to yourself and your why. And I think when you start doing that, life will start to make more sense. You'll no longer feeling like you're living someone else's life
Mm,
and you'll feel more at ease with yourself. And
yes.
ultimately, you'll be happier, which is what all of us want.
Yes.
And so that's why our mission at Anise is to empower everyone to live an authentic and flourishing life. Because we truly believe that when we live authentically to who we are, that's when we shine the brightest and can flourish. And we want people listening to really walk away knowing that prioritizing your own happiness isn't selfish. It's the only way to be of true service to our community.
Yeah, and you said something so important. You really locking into your own happiness, and I'm wondering if for the greater part of our community, we aren't really encouraged, as you shared, to necessarily look inward and to ask ourselves, well, what's going to make us happy? What's going to be meaningful to us? What's going to be purpose driven? So I really appreciate, Alice, you sharing that very explicitly and intentionally. Would you both be willing to share? Now, I was sharing with Nisha earlier, and Alice, I've shared this with you too. You both have just an incredible background. You have an incredible founding journey and story. I'm curious to know, how did your personal experiences, for example, and this is certainly not limited to, but Nisha, I know growing up in a family of healthcare entrepreneurs, and Alice, as a third culture kid navigating belonging, how did this shape the courage to just start something so meaningful and so purpose driven? Alice, I don't know, or go ahead, Nisha, if you want to start.
Yeah, I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, and especially those working in this industry, it is always personal, right? Otherwise, it's really hard to work as hard as we do and really stay committed unless you're very passionate and have like some sort of personal connection to the mission.
Yeah.
So you're definitely right. There is a lot of personal experience that went into us starting this company. For me, yeah, my family comes from a medical background, but specifically like medical entrepreneurs. So
Hmm.
my grandpa started a diagnostics company in India. He always talks about how he started it in his basement and, eventually grew to become one of the largest diagnostics companies in India
Wow.
that he actually sold to a Japanese company. And then my dad started a like pediatric urgent care center. Started as like one office, I think when I was in like elementary school or something, and now recently, a couple years ago, sold it to a larger player, and had like 15 or so offices across Florida, or urgent care centers rather. So I had a lot of inspiration of what it means to take risk, what it means to build impact-driven businesses, especially in healthcare.
Mm.
The, I think, difference for me was that they both kind of studied and came from a more clinical background. So my sisters went into like the clinical route. A lot of my cousins went down the clinical route. And while I obviously think that that's like a very noble and wonderful path, I felt myself wanting to tackle a lot of the systemic issues that I see in our system. So rather than a one-on-one impact on a patient, I wanted to have that one-to-many impact on kind of the whole system. And so I was driven to go down like the business route.
I see.
So my career has been a lot more heavily focused on like healthcare economics, healthcare innovation, healthcare technology, and how all of those things can play a role in really changing the way the healthcare system is run. And, you know, that's like kind of professionally what has driven me to want to work on something like Anise, which is really at the intersection of healthcare, clinical innovation, and technology innovation. And I think we're able to impact the lives of so many because of this like innovative approach that we've taken. And that's something that's very fulfilling to me because of what I saw in
Yes.
my family.
Yes, and if I may, it's both innovative, and I really believe that Anise is on the forefront of that. Alice, could you share your personal experiences?
Yeah. Well, it was really cool hearing about Nisha's family because I actually never heard that story about your grandparents selling their company to Japan, and there's a lot of Japan connections in our company. For me, so as you noted, Lindsay, I'm a third culture kid.
Hmm.
I was born in China. My family moved to Japan when I was 5 years old, and then immigrated to Canada when I was 11. And each time I didn't speak a word of Japanese or English and, knew nothing about the new country. And so by the time I went to college, I ended up going to 8 different schools. And that experience early on taught me that I could be dropped into any environment and sort of make it up alive, and come out
Yeah.
even stronger.
Yes.
And I had a lot of practice in adapting and being flexible and leveraging, creating new relationships and leveraging that to find belonging. So that I think that gave me a lot of confidence to put myself out there and try new things. But from a career standpoint, I had less of a role model from my parents. They come from a very academic background. My dad was a professor and my mom's a doctor. So they really leveraged education to escape poverty in China, but they didn't necessarily have a lot of the context of like economics or finances or how the
Mm.
world worked and all the systems thinking. So I studied neuroscience in undergrad and was a pre-med, but like Nisha, I also felt myself drawn to solving the system side of the healthcare
Mm.
issues. And when I realized that was my interest, I decided to pursue my first career in management consulting, where I could see a wide variety of industries and learn how companies think about strategy and implementation, and then transitioned into doing private equity and pursued my MBA. All of those open a lot of doors and also broaden my perspectives
Mm.
in terms of understanding how the world worked, and has really helped me with what I'm doing to build Anise right now.
Yeah, no, I appreciate. Thank you, Alice, for sharing that. And as I was sitting back and I was really listening to both of your stories, both of your journeys, it's very clear you're both very ambitious and incredibly accomplished, and you come from backgrounds that have really positioned you to do so in such an incredible way. And what I find so compelling about both of your stories is that, and Courage Class audience, I really want you to lock in on this because I really believe that both Nisha and Alice are examples to our community of folks who are pursuing meaning and purpose and are incredibly accomplished. And I want to underscore that. And in fact, Nisha, I think it was you who shared earlier that, our
Yeah.
community, right? Like we are very like achievement and accomplish focused. We are taught to meet those milestones, to want those milestones. And I want to make it okay that it's okay to want to be accomplished and to achieve. And it's possible to live a life of meaning and purpose and to build something
Yeah,
that
and
is
I think
rooted in that. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I
Ah,
think it's like exactly what Alice said earlier of like understanding the why behind that
mm,
accomplishment, right? Like it's perfectly okay to want to have goals and to want to accomplish
yes,
something, but if you're just doing it because it's a checklist or because your parents told you to,
yes,
that's different than
yes,
having like a true mission that's driving you.
yes.
And I think the latter is what can make you like truly feel fulfilled.
Totally. Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. Now let's talk about the mission. Both of you experienced therapy that didn't feel built for you. And that is going to resonate so strongly with our audience. It certainly resonates with my own story. Nisha, how did you go from personal experience to building and scaling a model for culturally attuned mental health care?
Yeah, so I told you a little bit about my like inspiration and professional desire to start Anise, but there's a lot of personal stuff that goes behind it as well. I struggled with mental health issues growing up, but it was very taboo in my household to talk about it. We chatted about this,
Yes,
Lindsay, about how,
understood.
it just wasn't really something that my parents encouraged me to pursue, like
Same.
getting professional
Yeah.
help. In fact, I was always taught to be tough. And so naturally, that led to me being pretty uncomfortable with asking for help from friends, from family, and definitely not from a therapist. And unfortunately, during college, my campus had a mental health crisis where there were 14 suicides of my classmates during the time that I was there and the 2 years after I graduated.
Mm,
And that was really like this red flag moment for me where I was realizing that majority of those individuals were Asian American. And I couldn't help but wonder if they were in a similar position as me, where, they might have been struggling for a while, but they didn't feel like they could ask for help because they were
yeah.
told to suppress their emotions, be tough, all of the
Yeah.
above. And so that was when I decided to give therapy a try for the first time. And unfortunately, I had a really bad experience. I think a lot of students can probably relate to this. Had a hard time getting an appointment at the college counseling center. But once I did, it was pretty generic. And, the therapist was really nice, but I was given very generic advice about like how to reduce stress around my relationships with my family.
Yeah.
And a lot of the advice included things like drawing hard boundaries, distancing, cutting ties, which weren't really in line with the values that
Yeah.
I was brought up with. And it
Yeah.
honestly just stressed me out more than it helped
Yeah.
me. So I stopped after just like that first session, and I found it really hard to start again until business school. So it was a long
Mm,
time that I was pretty like just exhausted by the process of therapy. And
yeah.
I only tried it once.
Yeah.
And mind you, I'm someone who works in healthcare, who believes in mental health care, but I couldn't even get myself to go.
Yeah.
So I think as I started business school and I was working at a big healthcare company on a mental health app and talking to users, I realized that there were many other people like me out there. It wasn't just a me problem. It was like a lot of people who felt these access barriers when it came to mental health care. They just like couldn't find a compatible provider, didn't feel comfortable sharing
Yeah.
their true selves, didn't feel like they were seeing results because of a very like one size fits all
Yes.
treatment approach. So that was when the light bulb went off for me of like, this is a real problem. And, you know, for someone who works in healthcare to be going through this much difficulty with trying to navigate the mental health system, just imagine how hard it is for everyone else.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there seems to be a lot of impact that we can create by building Anise. So Alice, luckily, was someone I met day one of business school at Harvard Business School, and we compared notes about our experiences and decided to start Anise.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. First of all, I'm so sorry to hear about what happened on your college campus. And what you shared about just you talked about the systemic barriers, just being understood by your healthcare provider, being able to access access mental health care. I mean, so much of what you just shared, Nisha, is it reminds me so deeply of my own initial experiences with the mental health care system. Alice, I wonder if we can transition into, so let's be very honest, this is a venture-backed company, which is incredible. And I was looking at some of the numbers this morning of how many companies that are female-led are venture-backed, and it was like 2%, and I couldn't even find disaggregated data on that. So like you both are, well, hopefully Anise is a unicorn, but literally you guys are unicorns, which is incredible. And so Alice, I'm wondering if you could speak to what were some of the barriers that you both faced as women of color fundraising in a largely non-diverse venture ecosystem, as well as just sort of navigating the complexities of the healthcare system.
Ooh,
That's
where do we even
question.
start?
I know. How much time do we have?
Yeah.
Or take
We
on
can do
two
a whole
gigantic
podcast
systems.
episode on
Yeah,
this.
right.
Well, I will say fundraising is tough for anyone, right?
Okay.
But as women of color building a culturally targeted solution, we face two additional layers of challenges.
Mm,
Um, for us, I think getting in the door was less of a problem because we were able to tap into our Harvard and professional networks, but we really had to navigate what happens after we get into the door through trial and error.
sure.
For example, one of the biggest lessons I learned was that VCs are actually, looking for someone they can really respect, or like their peers and not their subordinates.
Mm,
And culturally, coming from, working in Japan before business school and also in my previous career as a private equity investor, we were definitely taught to respect investors and so even like put them on a pedestal.
sure.
But in the venture world, that's not the dynamic. And you have to kind of treat them more like teammates. And
Oh,
it's funny because investors that end up investing are often ones that you become like a texting basis with. Like we become so comfortable with each other that you just like start to text instead of email. And I feel like the success rates of those investors are much higher.
interesting.
But without any of that context, it's hard for us to fit that pattern matching that
Mm,
VCs do, not just from an ethnicity perspective, like, oh, Alice doesn't look like Mark Zuckerberg, but from just how we behave and show up in the space.
oh,
So I think that's a huge challenge that minority founders who are less familiar with the unspoken norms of this industry, and because they have to learn how to be street smart in the VC world.
I would love to, and I know this is not in our line of questions. What do you mean by street smart? I would love for folks to hear. Can we peel back the curtain a little bit on that? Would you be willing to do that?
Yeah. Well, fundraising is kind of like dating.
Okay.
You you have a pipeline, you go on first dates, you're like sussing each other out. Are
Okay.
we interested enough to go on a second date, third date? Your goal out of each meeting is not to get to the investment right away, but to get to the next date. And so just like even understanding those contexts and also the timeline that VCs are operating on, and whether that matches with your startup's timeline. And that part actually makes building in healthcare
Mm,
challenging because VCs are on like a 10-year fund cycle where the first 5 years are allocating their capital and the last 5 years they're trying to exit and recoup their returns. But in healthcare, things are so complex, like you said, and things move much more slowly.
ah,
And so you're not getting this like hockey stick growth in the first like month that you launch, like
I
a
see.
lot of AI or SaaS companies
Yeah.
can get to. So you really have to find VCs who understand that timeline and are okay with operating in that timeline. The
Yeah.
barrier we experience where there's a disconnect between a lot of investors' lived experiences
Yeah.
and the problem that we're solving. And what data shows is that
Oh,
only
okay.
16% of VCs actually identify as Asian.
Okay.
So only a small proportion of investors have experienced the friction, the cultural friction that we're addressing. And it's not to say that, an investor needs to be Asian to invest in
Sure.
Anise. In fact, we have non-Asian investors.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that I have learned through this process that I didn't actually, necessarily realize at the very beginning of this journey was that early stage venture investing is actually a very creative process because you have to imagine a future that doesn't exist yet.
Mm.
And it makes it harder for an investor to imagine how your solution will be adopted in this world and how much impact that could have when they don't fundamentally understand the problem. And that's why, the advice for early stage startups a lot of times is like make sure you're solving a real problem, because unless you're doing that, your solution is not going to be adopted. And for us, we really had to work twice as hard to translate this Asian American emotional experience into a market opportunity for investors.
I see. That was the word I was thinking of. You have to do a lot of translation, it sounds like, as you're speaking to different types of investors. Thanks, Alice, for peeling back the curtain on that aspect. Nisha, I'm wondering if we could switch to community, because Alice, when we were imagining the world, 100 years from now, Alice spoke specifically to community, and I know that Anise is very much about building that and supporting that. Both of you spoke to community leaders, practitioners, people from our community as you prepared to launch Anise Health. Why was that so important to reach out to community? That's the first question. And what have you learned about collaboration and listening as you build this platform?
Yeah, absolutely. I strongly believe that the best businesses are built for real world user problems, not just perceived ones. And so I do think startups, like any startup, whether it's mental health or otherwise, should be talking to their users constantly, their target demographic, and it should be really an iterative process of building the product, building the service based on what is actually valuable to the end customer. And, I'm preaching this now, but we didn't always like fully internalize and know this. I'll be the first one to admit that we made mistakes along the way. And I think at the beginning of the process of starting Anise, we first tried to build what we thought was just like the most clinically innovative, exciting, based on academic research model, right? Care model. And that is something that Alice and I, as both like healthcare nerds, were really excited about launching. And we were like, people are going to love this too. But, that's not necessarily what the end user wants or needs. And as we built the business and refined based on user testing, we learned things that we just wouldn't have known before about, like, okay, what about our model is actually driving them to sign up?
Yes.
What are the key pain points? Like, I mentioned earlier, cost is something that matters a lot to people. So how do you get people to care about culturally responsive care if cost is still a barrier? So it's like balancing these different things. I thought an interesting example was in a recent user research sprint that we did. We were testing this concept of like gamification and badges for our users to keep them motivated to stay in care and adhere to their care plan. And while this is something that a lot of platforms use to keep people engaged and people like love it as it relates to like Apple Watch fitness programs and stuff
it's
like
that.
The
ding, the ding, ding. Like I got the award. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was actually not something that people liked as it pertained to mental health.
Interesting.
Because they were saying it felt like it was too competitive and it put the process of healing and learning about yourself on this like weird gamified timeline, which was actually counterintuitive to the process of like motivation. And so like without talking to our users, I honestly never would have expected that response. And it was really important because we didn't, waste our time building something that wasn't going to be used or wasn't going to be valued. And instead we could focus our efforts on the things that really did matter.
Yeah.
So that's just an example, but I do think you get stronger results if people are engaged, and people are only going to be engaged if you're building for what they want and what they need.
Absolutely.
And then you layer on the fact that we're this like kind of first to market product slash experience for the Asian community. And so when you're first to market, it's really important that you build a brand that feels trusted for that community. When there's a lot of stigma in mental health, I think it's important that we do take this like community oriented approach that helps break down that stigma, normalize conversation,
Yeah.
build awareness around like what is mental health?
Yeah.
When is it okay to get started? What are all the different provider types, and like how do you navigate that system? I think answering some of those questions in a
Yeah.
way that feels authentic and like connected to the community is really critical
Yeah.
in building that trusted brand.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I want to underscore trust because going to Anise's website, all the questions that you just posed, all the potential barriers is sort of questions that I had in my own mind when I was, first exploring Anise. And I felt like you were answering every single concern through your literature on the website. Around accessibility or matching, or what if I don't like the person? Oh, thank goodness. Like I can just, request you made it so easy. And I have to say, like, as someone who, I shared Nisha with you earlier, and Alice, I might have shared this with you as well. I study culturally responsive instruction in
Mhm.
school, and the same principles that I learned in school and even apply in my own classroom, I can feel them inside of the website, inside of my experience with Anise, inside with the folks that I speak to from the platform, from your company. And so I really want to say, underscore again, that word trust, building trust and listening is for sure something that I personally have felt. And I have no doubt that so many of your users, if not all, feel that exact same way. Alice, I would love to switch to, okay, we have to sing your praises, both of you. So Anise Health was named a top 10 most innovative AAPI led company to watch by the New York Stock Exchange, Y Combinator, and Gold House. Very exciting. So, as leaders, how do you make decisions that really honor your values when investor or market pressure may say otherwise? Alice, would you be willing to speak to that?
Yes. Thank you, Lindsay, for your kind words, including your experience with our website and Flow. Our whole marketing team, led by Nisha, will be very happy. So we'll definitely be passing that message on.
Mm.
Um, yeah, for us, one of our core values at Anise is to be measurement based
Okay.
because we believe you become what you measure. So it's really important that your business metrics align with your values. And I think I can speak for Nisha too, but part of why we love being in healthcare, working in healthcare, is because this is actually much easier to do in healthcare than other industries. Because if our patients get better and our patients panel grows, our business is growing, and we're growing our impact as well. So
Mm.
in that sense, I think our values and metrics are fundamentally the same thing. And while you hear horror stories about investors pressuring founders to do things that are not
Yeah.
in the best interest of the business or the founders, but we really haven't experienced any of that yet. And
Mm.
I think yet, or hopefully never,
Never.
but
Yeah.
I think it's largely because we've been very authentic in how we pitch Anise, which has helped attract the right kind of investors who genuinely understand and care about our mission and the problem that we're solving.
Mm.
So, whenever we go to them with questions, and sometimes I would expect them to give like a more VC-esque response, like, hey, should we be doing more with AI? Because that's the
Ah,
hottest thing right now.
okay.
And actually having our investors be like, no, focus on like what's core to your business right now, whether that's AI or not,
Mm.
has surprised me.
Yeah.
But I think it shows that they truly understand the business
Yeah.
and are behind, what Nisha and I have envisioned for Anise. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is. It's wonderful to know that you have that support in your corner. Could I ask a follow-up question, Alice? How do you communicate to investors that cultural attunement is necessary versus a nice to have?
yeah, we definitely don't pitch this as a nice to have. We pitch it
Mm.
as a clinical necessity because
Mhm.
it's true, the current one-size-fits-all model is failing us. And what that data shows is that Asian Americans are 3 times less likely to seek mental health services than our white peers. And even when we do make it into care, 50% of us will drop out after just the first session because the providers don't get our cultural context. And so this is no longer a preference issue, right? When you don't have that adherence, people are dropping out of care, and they are ultimately ending up in setting of care that requires a lot more serious interventions that is more costly to the healthcare system. So due to this, there is over $2 billion in inflated annual healthcare cost every year. So we really use data to communicate that cultural attunement isn't just a preference issue, but a clinical imperative.
Yeah, that could save a lot of money, it sounds like, if we were to get it right on the outset. I wonder if you
I
both.
was just
Oh, go
going
ahead,
to
Nisha.
add,
Yeah,
Alice shared a lot of kind of like macro data that makes it clear that this is a really urgent problem that needs to be solved. I think another thing that works well is showing like user data and showing them that even people who have access to mental health benefits through their work, who have tried therapy before, are not using those benefits and coming to Anise because of their dissatisfaction with those options. I think that speaks volumes to the fact that it's like
yes,
not just a nice to have. If it was a nice to have, then people would not be using Anise when they have access to other options that might be
absolutely.
more convenient or easier to access. But in this case, they just recognize how necessary it is. They've been burned by the system in the past. And I think that data also speaks volumes to like the importance and the value that we're able to drive.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you sharing that, Nisha. What advice would you give to the person who is struggling with cultural expectations, ambition, and remaining true to themselves? Yeah,
You're really not alone. If you grew up in a culture where achievement or keeping the peace or things like scarcity mindset are present, it's really easy to lose sight of your own voice and just feel like you have to do whatever everyone else tells you to do
yeah,
or whatever makes everyone else happy.
yeah.
And so like I'm super guilty of this. We actually just like launched this holiday series and I jokingly called myself a recovering people pleaser as my intro because for most of my life I've just been so deeply committed to making others around me happy without like really paying attention to my own needs. And that's not always a bad thing. We come from a collectivist culture. It's part of who we are.
Sure.
But I think my advice would really be that just like also let it be okay to turn inwards and ask yourself, are the expectations of me aligned with my identity, or are they ones that I feel like I have just inherited or follow out of obligation? And just taking a moment to reflect on that and acknowledge the difference can be a really helpful first step in knowing how to make more authentic choices. Some of the things might be really important to your identity. And so, like, you don't have to compromise on that just because we live in a more like independent culture in America.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is to give yourself permission to seek help. I do really think talking to others about your struggles can help you gain perspective that you might have not had before. We often like stir in our own heads and tell ourselves kind of what we want to hear. It's a bit of an echo chamber, but when you open up and talk to other people and feel seen and heard by those other people, whether it's your community or a professional, I think you can go a really long way with self-discovery and growth. And so those are like the two pieces of advice I'd give.
Yeah, no, that was wonderful. Encourage class. I really hope you heard that. Nisha just gave us permission to turn the lens inward and ask what do we want, and to also, oh my gosh, to ask that it's okay and it's normal to ask for help. I think is so important.
I hear that, especially from the younger generation. Their parents may not be like the traditional sense of tiger parents, but they've seen how are their parents' work and the model minority stereotypes that's
Yeah.
cast on us, and they internalize a lot of it, and that just becomes your reality. So questioning that, unpacking it, and looking at like, is this a real expectation or just like something that I have like placed on myself
Yeah.
that is unnecessary?
Yeah, you're right, Alice. It's kind of like the air we just breathe to some degree, our culture, right? We just sort of absorb it. And to your point, to internalize that. So thank you for saying that. You both talked about barriers you faced in a fundraising and healthcare context. How has therapy helped you in this entrepreneurial journey? And what have you learned about yourself? And what personal barriers have you had to overcome to get this far?
Yeah, I mean, Alice
Yeah,
said this at the beginning. I
yeah,
really believe that everyone should try therapy
yeah,
because you learn so much about yourself. And I think what's interesting about building Anise is that what we are preaching every day as like our mission, culturally attuned care, is actually like what I have personally experienced going through therapy and applying kind of my identity, my values to the way that I build a company is what has made us successful. It's what has made this experience fun because it's very authentic. And
yeah,
so I think if you can apply that to your life outside of work too, like just imagine, you know, how much potential you have
yeah.
to live like a flourishing life. So, anyways, specifically, one thing I've had to unlearn is perfectionism. Um, I think a lot of us
Me
Asians
too.
are probably
Yes.
are
Yes.
probably guilty of that.
Guilty. Yes.
Yeah, so I have very kind of quickly had to learn that being a perfectionist in this role doesn't really serve me. Embracing failure is something that is like it's advice that you get from a lot of people who have run and built and sold successful startups because failure is actually what helps you learn, right? If you run experiments, learn what's not working, it's a data point for iteration and learning. And that iteration is what helps startups grow. And so if I'm trying really hard to be super perfect and afraid of failure, then I'm actually like kind of kicking myself in the butt.
Yeah.
And that is not helpful to the business. And it also leads to like panic attacks for me every time that
Yeah.
something fails. This is something I dealt with when we were building our pilot. Had to build the kind of initial version of our product without any technical experience and with the help of like two very young, inexperienced engineers, and they were in college.
Mhm.
And I was just holding myself to such a high standard of like if there was a single bug, it was like all hell broke loose and I would have panic attacks
Yeah.
because I was trying so hard for this to be perfect instead of just saying like let's get something out there, listen to the feedback and iterate, and it's
Yeah.
okay if it's not perfect. Now I try to operate every day with this 80-20 rule of finding the things that basically make your work most effective 80% of the time. I try to just follow that rule and make sure that I'm okay with good enough instead of
Yeah.
perfect when I'm building.
I love the 80-20 rule. Thanks for sharing that. Can I ask you a follow-up question? It sounds like, and let me know if this is not accurate, it sounds like it's something you have to, it's not something, perfectionism isn't something necessarily that has gone away per se with therapy. It sounds like it's something that you've learned tools, you've learned skills to have greater ease in your life, if you will.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
I mean, you don't need to like change yourself, right? But
Yeah.
you do need to learn how to adapt, cope, manage based on your situation as
Yeah.
things evolve. And in this case, building a startup, it wasn't serving me
Yeah.
well. And so I've
Okay.
learned skills to
Yeah.
adapt.
I was so hoping you would say it's not something you have to change about yourself. So I think that's going to make a lot of people feel really good. So there's nothing wrong with you. It's just about learning skills. So thanks for that, Nisha. Alice, can I ask you?
Yeah, I feel like we could have a whole episode on perfectionism
Oh,
too,
yes.
and it's
Yes.
actually one of the dimensions that we focus on in Anise because it's so prevalent in our community. And one of the unique assessments that Anise offers is a measurement of perfectionism,
Oh,
and it helps to classify different types of perfectionism and delineate like having high standards and, you know, being like meticulous and wanting to do things to like a certain standard, from feeling like if you are not perfect, then you have failed, or being constantly fearful of how you're perceived if you're not perfect. And the latter is what creates a lot of the unhealthy impact of perfectionism. So,
Wow. So I just to clarify, so perfectionism is something that's very prevalent in our community.
yes.
And this
Yes.
is this the reason why you have this scale or a survey rather?
Yeah.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's
So,
something that really, I always thought I was like, oh, is it a girl thing? Oh, the Asian girl, eldest, I don't know, but I didn't know it was something that was like a data informed thing in our community. That's incredible.
yeah. Find out more by checking out Anise.
Yes, they can take that survey
Yeah.
on the website, just asking for a friend. No, I'm just joking. Okay.
Yeah. But for me,
Yeah.
just to answer your question about how therapy has helped me,
Yes.
it's been an essential tool for me because
Okay.
entrepreneurship is so tough.
I bet. Yeah.
And as founders, you're living in this constant state of uncertainty, almost questioning yourself daily. Is this going to work? Are we going to reach the milestone? Are we even going to exist in 2, 3 years?
Yeah.
And not only that, you're dealing with constant rejections, things not working out, like Nisha said. So um, it's tough, and having a dedicated time to process that, and having, a professional who can support you through this tough journey that can bring up a lot of self-doubt, has been imperative for me to get to where I am.
Yeah.
And then personally, something that I've learned in therapy is actually that I live with a lot of anxiety, but I never knew that about myself because I also thought of myself as a chill person, or maybe that
Oh,
was how
yeah.
I was like coping, right? And it actually took being in therapy for years because none of my therapists actually explicitly diagnosed me with anxiety or have like told me, hey, that sounds like anxiety. But I had to kind of like realize it through my own therapy journey. And, I was like so high functioning because I've just learned to cope with it by pushing down all of my emotions, and that eventually will catch up to you. So I think the therapy journey has really helped me recognize it. And when
Mm.
you acknowledge it, is actually when you can start to get better,
Yeah.
not when you try to push it away and pretend that it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And it's helped me develop healthier ways of coping with it.
Yeah, and your story, I think, is probably so common across our community. Like we just don't realize that maybe we are dealing with anxiety or we're sad or and to know that through therapy, through culturally attuned therapy, it can really help you to sort of see that, hold that, and then you can begin to learn the skills to help to bring greater ease to your life. And that's what it feels like it has done for both of you. I'd love to transition to AI, if that's it. We talked about we mentioned AI a couple times in this conversation. And so Nisha, I'm curious to know, in a world increasingly shaped by AI and automation, can you share, what do you think what human-centered skills will matter the most? And I'm curious, how can Anise be a partner in helping us in this next sort of wave of technology?
Yeah, it's the $1 million question,
It is.
We're always getting asked, like, what's going to happen to the therapy industry? Like,
Yeah.
is the role of therapists obsolete? And it's like, no, it's still a very human centered process.
Yeah.
So it's really like, how can we augment our systems and processes using AI to make the system more efficient? But like ultimately, that relationship is very human,
Hmm.
and for a lot of people, that's not going to change. But all this to say, I think when I think about what skills or what like traits make us inherently human, it's things like emotional intelligence, empathy for others, creativity, like
Mm.
resilience, these types of things that like separate us from a
A robot.
machine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think are the things that really require like human interaction, right? It requires you to collaborate with others. It requires connection. And those things like need to be practiced daily if we don't want to lose those skills that make us human. If we over rely on AI for those things, like for emotional support, for creativity,
Yeah.
for like reasoning, it can be hard to like practice that daily, and you might lose yourself to the world of AI. And so
Yeah.
I think where Anise can really play a role is with those relational skills, building real self-awareness, helping people continue practicing some of these like very inherently human things
Yeah.
so that they can thrive in a world that inherently, like, let's not lie, like AI is going to play a role. It's going to make our world change, move faster. But if we can like ground ourselves in these core human skills through practicing daily skills, therapy, I think we can avoid getting lost within that world and figure out how to like really thrive in
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And you said the word practice 4 times. And I think it's so important to underscore that these are skills, connection, communication, collaboration. These are all practice skills that a niece healthcare provider can help you with. And if you
Yes.
and like just not even like with a niece, but to practice it with the people who you are in relation with. This is incredibly important. In that context, Nisha, if listeners took one courageous action today to align their life with their values, what would you want it to be?
I'm a huge fan of reflection. I think without taking pause from the busy, chaotic life that we live in, it's really easy to get sucked up in it and caught up. And in that process, it can be hard to think, like to do our deep thinking.
Mm,
So I'm a huge proponent of um, doing basically taking like intentional rest and pause. Like
yes.
I try not to open my laptop on Saturdays. I think having that space for me is what helps me really think about like creative things to get new ideas,
Yeah.
get clarity on like if I feel stuck on problems. And I think as a founder, that's really important. But I think as anyone, as a
Yeah.
person, that's important. So hopefully, as we approach the holidays, everyone gives themselves that time. Um, and I think one reason why I think that that's like a very courageous action is and why I think it helps you really find alignment is because you can really identify like what gives you energy versus what depletes your energy when you take that time to pause. So going all the way back to understanding the why behind like everything you
Yes.
do, I think taking that time for intentional rest is what can help you really identify like actually this thing that I'm doing is not serving me. It's
Mm,
actually my therapist told me about this like spoons concept where like imagine a bowl full of like 10 spoons and every action you do either like takes a spoon out of that bowl and then by the end of the day, if you're done, you get a new bowl the next day. But if you take a spoon from the next day's bowl, then you're just like further depleting yourself forever. And so unless you're
yeah.
doing activities that like refill your bowl with spoons, then you're kind of like operating in a deficit.
Uh,
And so taking that time to pause and think about what are the things like one step at a time that you want to do to fill your energy, I think is like something that you can do to find that alignment in your life.
yeah. Thank you for that. I love that you said intentional rest too. That's so much different than rest. I've been talking about rest. As Alice knows, my husband took a sabbatical. We've been talking about rest in our family, but to be intentional about it and to really think about what's serving you and what's not. I love the visual of the spoons as well. Thanks for that. Alice, I have two final questions. What's the biggest lesson you've learned about leadership and healing on this journey, individually and from each other, actually? And Alice, could you start us off?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Nisha, I loved your response, and I'm making a mental note to slack you less on Saturdays. She's so responsive. Yeah, the biggest lesson, oh, so many lessons. I think the biggest lesson is that you have to believe in yourself and your mission first to show up as a strong leader
Mm,
for the rest of your team. In VC lingo, you always talk about having conviction. And I really realized that if you don't believe in yourself, no one else will. So taking the time to care for ourselves, like Nisha said, build that self-awareness will help you lead with more clarity and authenticity. And that has ripple effects on the rest of the team and can result in much healthier and more productive culture. So yeah, that's the biggest lesson. And I am so grateful that I have been working with Nisha as my partner because I think we've really learned a lot from each other. Our personalities and skill sets are actually quite complementary. And I think that's always a good thing to look for in a co-founder because you don't want your strengths to overlap too much.
Yeah.
And for me, the biggest thing I learned from Nisha is one, how to be more direct in communicating. I come from a background where, you know, I worked in Japan for most of my career. I grew up there, and um, people don't communicate too directly in Japan. In fact, if you're bringing up something, it's like quite serious, and you're always like reading between the lines.
I see.
And I feel like I took that same mentality when we just started working together. Whereas Nisha was always like proactive about addressing anything that, you know, might be an issue later on and being very direct about it. And it took, you know, time for me to practice and get used to it. But now I'm a firm believer in being direct communicator. So that has really impacted how I show up as a leader, as well as in my personal life.
Yeah.
And then the second thing I think is she has shown me how to have a strong sense of self-confidence. I think Nisha is so intentional in everything she does, and she works very hard at it. And, you know, that really shows in the kind of confidence that she has in herself. So seeing that in action has, I think, helped me be more confident in myself. I wasn't really the type to be like naturally super confident, but, you know, even like simply because of the fact that I have such a kick-ass partner has given me a ton of confidence. So
Yeah. That's wonderful.
You know, things that I've learned and transformed about my leadership style because of her. I think a really important thing that I've internalized is how important it is to hold space for compassion in moments of tension. There's a lot of moments of tension in startup life, and a really strong way of keeping a team motivated and approaching leadership is like being compassionate and understanding, trying, you know, not placing blame, trying to instead approach like any problem with like a problem solving mindset instead of like this is like a huge issue and like harping too much on that. And then also like a giving versus taking mindset. I think we like often think that our Asian values around like being givers, being collectivists is like a problem when we live in this Western society. But I think Alice is a perfect example of someone who makes so much space and time for other people. Like she gives a lot to other people, and it's not at it doesn't come at the expense of opportunity. Instead, it actually like creates opportunity because she is creating this environment that helps people feel very supported and human and happy, and eventually that trickles down to progress and performance for the business. And so I think keeping that in mind as I'm like being a leader and making time for giving instead of just like treating building a business as transactional is something that has started to serve me really well thanks to what I've learned from Alice.
In our final question, can you please define courage? What does it mean to you?
oh, big question. Courage to me isn't about the absence of fear. I think it's the openness to accept the reality of where we are today with all of its problems, barriers, and stigmas while maintaining this optimism about the future and being relentless in pursuing what could be. So it's kind of like having one foot planted in the truth and the other moving forward towards the vision.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I think in a similar vein, I would define it kind of as choosing what's true over what's easy.
Mm.
I think being honest with yourself is very courageous, even when it's uncomfortable. And yeah, I don't think it's really related to fear. It's actually saying, like, how can I just operate from a place of authenticity and alignment with my values? And if you can do that, you're extremely courageous.
Yes.
Even if like you are fearful, you're still courageous because you're operating from a place of what's true to you and what's honest to you.
Absolutely. And on that note, I just want to thank you both so much for your time.